everybody. In this video I'm going to be fixing a cold start issue that's been bedeviling the car you see behind me, which is a 1987 Ferrari Mondial 3.2. Fortunately, my issue is confined to a relatively simple system. Let me just explain how the cold start system works. When the engine is cold, the engine block is cold, and you turn the key. This right here is basically a ninth fuel. What it does, it squirts some fuel directly into the intake plenum. And it does so only for a second. There's a switch, which is actually, you can't see it here, but it's the oil filter screwed directly into the engine block. And that switch will send electricity to the cold start injector only when you have the key on start, when the motor is cranking away. And then it's called a Thermotime switch because it has a coil that will send electricity that will warm the thing up, so that when it's warm, the switch opens the circuit and it stops. So it's designed only to have this fuel injector spray fuel for only a second, even when the engine remains warm. When the engine block itself is warm, the circuit is open. So my hypothesis is that my problem is caused by either one or maybe both, but probably most likely only one of these components. One, it could be that the cold start injector is not functioning. Second, and I think more likely, it could be the switch, that the switch is not sending electricity to this thing when it should. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test the Thermotime switch. And the way we're going to do this is this is the connector that goes right to the cold start valve, the fuel injector. I've removed that. And when the car is being cranked, I'm putting a voltmeter on this across the two terminals in the connector, like so. And it should be zero. It should be reading 0 right now when the car is not being started. But when the car is started, and this is a very sensitive little machine. Okay, so it's 0 right there. And then when my good wife starts the car on my signal, this should jump up to 12 volts. Okay, sweetheart, start it up. Do it again. Okay. All right, so as you saw there, when she started the motor, I did get some voltage, but I didn't get 12 volts. That might suggest that the cold start, the Thermotime switch, it's giving some power, but not enough power to energize the cold start injector. Let me skip now and try to check the injector itself. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to remove it. I'm going to undo these bolts here, and then I'm going to hook it up to a battery and see if it sprays. Now what I'm going to be doing here, I'm going to be right here is the fuel line. That's the fuel that goes into the injector. That I'm leaving alone because I want fuel to be going into it. But I'm going to remove it so I can actually see whether in fact it is spraying fuel like it's supposed to. And so I'll have it spray into an empty jar. It in fact does spray at all. And I've attached here another electrical connector. We're bypassing the Thermotime switch. And so I'll just put a battery here that will energize it, and that will be able to, then I'll be able to tell whether it in fact is working. Off comes the injector. Again, we're keeping the fuel line attached. You see here, the fuel line is still attached, and I've put in a connector, an electrical connector. This is sort of a fairly cheap sort of standard Bosch connector that I got on eBay for about $5. And this is going to be connected to this system, which runs under the trunk and a battery. And so I'm using this as my 12 volt source. Connect the battery, and I put this connection in here into this sort of connector. That'll close the circuit, and we'll see if the injector works. And then what we'll do is we will run the fuel pump and see if we actually get a spray. So let's do that. Okay, so the battery's connected. I'm going to press this, and what we should hear is the injector click if it's actually getting electricity. So you hear the click? So that's good. That's a good sign. To get fuel into the injector, I've turned the key on the ignition to the run setting. And what that will do is it will enable us to actually run the fuel pump without starting the car. Okay, so to run the fuel pump, I am going to, this is sort of a shortcut. Generally, what I do is I disconnect that plug there, which is a safety switch that ensures that the fuel pump isn't running when the car stops. That's in case you have an accident and the engine stops. You don't want to have high pressure fuel being sprayed onto a wreck and fueling a fire potentially. Since that's hard to get to, I'm going to do a shortcut. And if you look here, this is sort of the intake. I've taken the air filter out, and if I press down on this gently, that will sort of fool the system into thinking that the car is running, and that should when I press this down gently, you should hear the fuel pumps running. So let me try that. You hear the fuel pumps running? So that should pressurize the system. Okay, I'm going to energize the injector, and here we're actually going to add fuel, or we should, because I've sort of primed up the pump, and that's why it's in a glass jar. If you focus on that, you can see if we get a stream. Okay, and you see that this is all sort of damp from fuel, and that tells me that the cold start injector actually works, and that's a really good sign. That means that I don't have to replace this thing, and it also means that the source of my problem is the Thermotime, which I will order a new one and I will replace. Okay guys, just before one final check, I just want to look at one of the fuses that is responsible for this, just in case that might be a really simple fix. This is the owner's manual for this car, and this is a diagram here, and what I'm looking at is the fuse mark number 9, which is the cold electro start valve right there, which in the diagram, if you look up here, is 9. It is the third fuse on the sort of second block. So you see right here, here's the second block, starts here, 1, 2, 3, it's a 7.5 amp. Okay, so I've removed the sort of plastic cover here. I'll put that. And the fuse I want is this guy right here. I'll position the camera there and just pluck this out. And see, it's pulled off there. So that looks like I need a new fuse. There's my fuse coming out for the electro start valve. Maybe that's my issue. All right, so this is my little fuse, spare fuse container, and we want is a 7.5 amp. Okay, so that's a 75. It looks like that might be my problem, but actually I looked at more carefully, and I think the fuse wire was intact. It was just simply, I think the contact just came out of its plastic, but without breaking the fuse. So I'm not convinced, unfortunately, that this is my answer. I think this is just a casualty of removal. There we go. This is my 7.5. And hopefully, well, we'll see it. I don't think it will solve the problem, but and certainly it was easy enough to check. Okay, let's let it rip. Stop. Do it again. Okay, you're all done. Hi guys, one of the reasons for doing these repair videos is to hopefully to show you that maintaining a Ferrari of this vintage need not be prohibitively expensive so long as you're willing to do a lot of the work yourself and you're not afraid of getting your hands dirty, and two, you're savvy about sourcing parts. As far as the second point is concerned, the key is just to remind yourself that, you know, Ferrari is a small company and didn't actually manufacture many of the parts that you'll end up needing. And the key is to find what the original source was for those, and maybe what other cars that part is found on. And if you're able to do that, you won't have to pay Ferrari prices for it. So in this particular case, what I was hoping is that the part that I need, the Thermotime switch, it's manufactured by Bosch, and therefore was used on other European cars in the 1980s. And so the key is to find out what other cars that part is found on, and then buy it from that source rather than direct from a Ferrari source. Okay, so if I go on to sort of a Ferrari part site, this one I'm showing you here is from AW Italian, which I think is one of the better ones. You plug in the make and model and year of your car, and you find that the part is listed here, Thermotime switch. It's got a Ferrari part number there, and it is available for $230. But what you should do then is to find the Bosch part number and sort of cross-reference it, and what you discover is that this part is also on a Saab 900 Turbo from the mid-1980s, and as you see there, then that part was listed at $136. So you can get the part for almost half price. And it's the very same part. It's not simply an aftermarket part that will fit. It is the exact same part. However, what I discovered was sort of the other side of sort of vintage car ownership, and that is many of these parts are, you get this message, which no one wants to see, part no longer available. I went on to eBay to find this part and decided to buy what is advertised here as the new part. It was coming from a seller in Lithuania, and so I bought this. I bought it for $230 plus shipping. It cost me about $260. Thus, you know, basically I'm paying sort of the original Ferrari price for the thing. One of the kind of cruel ironies of no longer available parts is that now the Saab guys have to pay Ferrari prices for their Thermotime switches. And this is what I've got here. Here's the sort of basically almost unobtainium now. This is the part that I'm going to install in the Ferrari. Okay guys, replacing the Thermotime switch. And this part is located, as you can see here in this diagram. This is the intake plenum, which is right up here. And the Thermotime switch is this piece that's highlighted in yellow. And where that's going to be found in the engine is right under the sort of driver's side, directly under here. And to see it, one has to remove the oil filter. And we do this. So you can see the brass part, you can see, which is this piece on top. And to work on it, we're going to first have to remove this piece here, which is the switch for the oil, low oil pressure warning light, and that's bolted in right into the to the housing of the oil filter here, which is easy to remove. So the first thing to do is to pop off the connector here. You see the connector on the oil filter. The connector has been freed. You can't see that well. There you go. The connector's off. And I just put I believe this is 22 millimeters. There's the oil low pressure switch. Put it there. And then you see we have a clear shot at the Thermotime switch, as you right see there, with the brown plastic. Okay folks, I detached the plug from the Thermotime switch. Unfortunately, in doing so, despite my best efforts, the little locking wire on these Bosch connectors, I got it loose and then it dropped, and then I was fishing it out with a magnet. It sort of has disappeared, so I'm going to have to go fish that out because that's important. So I managed to recover that. Be careful that you don't lose this. It's very easy to lose these things, and surprisingly difficult to replace them. Okay guys, so removing this is actually pretty straightforward. When I first did this job, I thought to reach in there I had to use a crow's foot wrench, which is very awkward. But then I discovered later that I can do it much more easily with a 24mm socket, which once you remove the connector, you can just plunk that down over the switch, put a socket on top, and unscrew it and remove it, and then installing the same way. So that's really easy. What's tricky about this job is that, and this is something I didn't know when I first did it, the switch screws right into the engine block, but it actually goes into the water jacket, which means that when you remove it, the coolant, which is under pressure, will escape through the opening. As you could hear there, I lost a lot of coolant. I wasn't quite quick enough, so okay, as you see, I've lost more coolant than I thought, even when I was expecting it. There's quite a bit there. So, okay, after I've cleaned that up, I'm going to just tighten up the switch. The next step is to attach the connector. Okay, you see the connector there of the new switch, and I just get my hand in there. Okay, so the connector is on the switch, as you see there, and then really the last thing to do is to reattach the locking wire, which surprisingly is the most challenging part of the whole job. So that sort of fits around the groove at the end, surrounding that at the bottom of that brown connector. Okay, now just replace the oil low pressure switch. Okay, it's all nice and snug. The last step is to attach the connector. All right, we go again. Okay, the way you test this Thermotime switch is you measure the resistance from one of these plugs, the one marked W, which you can see, that's marked G, so it's on the other side. The pin marked W, which would be that one, and the metal body of the switch. Now, this is designed to close at 45 degrees centigrade, which is somewhere between 110 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously it's not that warm here now. So this, in its current condition, it reflects the cold start condition, in which case you want this to be closed, right, to deliver power to the cold start injector. So what we want to see is basically zero resistance here if it's working properly. So we test our ohm meter. So we test resistance here. Let's put it at 200. The one tells you that it's an open circuit, basically infinite resistance. But if I put these terminals there would be the W. Okay, there would be the W terminal, and then on the ground, and you see it has minimal resistance. If I put it to the body here, very little. Effectively, this is a closed circuit. When this was in the car, and if it were getting electricity, the car would start. So I replaced it unnecessarily. To test it, to make sure that it really works as it's intended to do, we'll see whether the switch opens up at above 45 degrees centigrade. And for that, I have here a jar of water, very hot water. So that water should be not that far off from 200 degrees Fahrenheit and or 100 degrees centigrade. So it's well above the 45 degrees. And what we should see there when we do the same resistance check is that the W terminal and the main body. So the switch is closed. It's basically, you know what I'm going to do? Let me just turn. What it should do is it should open up, and it should be an open circuit, which means that it should be near infinite resistance. So here in the cold position, as you see, it's zero, as it should be. But then when it heats up, okay, I'm testing this with a pair of gloves. And you see, it shoots right up. One. See, there you go. So this switch works. It works. It opens basically when it's supposed to, when it's hot, and it's closed when it's cold. All right, so this is the wiring diagram of my car right there. And this page has this page contains the diagram for the fuel delivery system. And so if you look on this map, up here on the key, on the top here, this 141 is the Thermotime switch, which we see on the diagram is right here. And it has two wires coming into it. It's got the input, and then it has the output, which if you trace this, will go to the 143, I think that is, and that's my cold start injector. And so our problem is that the switch is closed, so that current should be, when the car is cold, the switch is cold, it's giving minimum resistance, which means if there's current in the input, it should be going to the cold start injector and our car should fire right up. However, what we discovered is that there's no voltage measured here, and yet the switch should be giving voltage. So that means that we have to locate the problem in the sort of input wire, which we'll say here, you see here on the diagram, it says BN. BN. B stands for Bianco, N for Negra, which means it's a black-white wire. And if you follow this along here, it goes through a connection. It goes through here, all the way up here, through another connection terminal,
all the way up here and down here. It's the third wire in this thing. Right there, along there, and my fingernails tracing. And it's the third one along here. And then you see that the third wire will go to the bottom connector here, the W connector. Now this is on the fuse box, and I'll show you where this is. This is a long sort of a plastic white connector into the fuse panel. And what I want to do is to see if the bottommost wire is a black-white wire. And if it is, what we'll do is we'll test the voltage off of this terminal. Also, I'll hook up the positive probe of my voltage meter to this wire here at the fuse box, the W connector of the fuse box. The other end will be on a ground. And we'll see that, we'll check to see when we fire up the car, when it's cold, this should be delivering voltage, right? Now, if it's reading 0 voltage, we know the problem lies over here somewhere. That we could assume that this is all this stuff is probably okay. If, however, we discover that there is 12 volts being produced here on the black and white wire here, and the thermotime switch is working, as we've discovered, then there must be some problem along this wire, maybe in one of these connection boxes, maybe the wire. You might check continuity and do all sorts of other tests. But this is one way of kind of locating the problem. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We'll go out to the car, and I'll show you where this W terminal is and where that wire is. Alrighty, here's the fuse box, and this right here, this white connector is the W connector, and you can see the last wire is a black-white wire, as the diagram said there would be. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my probe into, there's a little space where I can test the voltage coming off of that. Okay. So we found we had no voltage being produced at the W10 terminal. So with that result, we trace things back. Now we're internal to the fuse box. And if you follow this highlighted track, the next place to check would be at the fuse. We already replaced this fuse and checked the fuse itself. But what we want to do now is to check whether current is going through that fuse when the car is being cranked. So we're going to test the voltage right here. What we're going to test now is the fuse for the cold start circuit. Remove the fuse. There's the fuse. And what we're going to do is we're going to test the voltage in the female connector here, like that, when we crank the engine. And we should be getting 12 volts or 10 volts, something around there. We should get some voltage. Okay, start it up. Stop. Okay, try it again. Okay guys, so this reading was negative, which basically tells us that the problem lies on this side and not on that side, right? So we can assume, at least for now, that this path all the way through to the W10 terminal, all the way to the thermotime switch in the engine compartment, that's probably okay. Our problem lies somewhere along this line. And so the next stop along this path will be, and this is where the is what is called the Y terminal, which is another one of these. This one is actually a horizontal terminal, and it's located on the very bottom of the fuse box. And the wire that we're looking for, it says B here, which means that it's a white wire. So there should be a white wire in the third pin on the Y connector. And so what we're going to do is we're going to test the voltage on cranking right here, and I should be getting voltage. And again, if I'm not, it means, actually I'm kind of hoping that we don't get any, because if there is voltage here, it means the problem is internal to the fuse box. And that will involve replacing or repairing the fuse box, which is incredibly expensive. And it's actually a common failure point on these old Ferraris. If, on the other hand, I get a negative reading here, it means that we still need to trace the circuit further back, and then we're getting right to the next stop will be when we're off the diagram. But it goes this wire will connect to the ignition switch. But let's test the voltage here at Y3 and see what we get. Okay guys, so we just did this check on the Y3 pin. We got a negative result, which that sort of vindicates our fuse box, which is kind of nice. Well, we can assume that the problem isn't there. The problem rather lies here. The kind of a blown up version of the same diagram. So the problem lies somewhere along this line highlighted in yellow here. And the Y3 terminal is connected to a connector, which then goes right to the ignition key. This is the ignition switch here. So the next step in our sort of search for a problem will be to go into the passenger compartment and take a look at the wiring, look under the dashboard and look at the wiring leading to the ignition switch and see if we see any problems there. Okay, removing this cover on the bottom of the steering column to access the wires for the ignition switch. And there's a couple of Phillips screws. These are the wires, and this sort of bluish tube are coming from the ignition switch. So this one, we trace that, and it goes. This is the connector for our ignition switch, and so I'm going to look at the wire in question is this white one. Okay, guys, here's the ignition switch, and these wires here, and these wires are from the ignition switch. They come here to the connector, and then these are the outputs. White wire here. That's, I think, from the number 50 terminal on my starter. So I could check to see if there's voltage coming there. Now I'm pretty sure it is, because that's also going to the starter motor. But on the other side, we find something interesting. So the output side. And let me get this out here. There it is. So I'm going to put some electrical tape around that. See, there's two wires. They're spliced together, and they're white. And the wire we're looking for is white. They are. And there's a black electrical tape around the end of it. And this looks like that it was going to go into the side of the connector. Let me pull apart the connector and take a look at that. There's my connector apart. Problem is going to be this, whether this where the devil is it? Whether this these two white wires here actually were intentionally taken out. And then of course it's why, if they were removed, why is that? Okay guys, my hypothesis for those two white wires is that they are these two in the diagram. This 83 here is the ignition switch, and number 50, terminal 50, is engaged when you're cranking the motor. And what the diagram tells us is that there are two wires Both of them are white. These are both white wires, as is the connector here. And one of them, you see, goes all the way here to the Y contact or Y terminal, the third pin in my fuse box. And then from there, that goes all the way here. So this line activates the cold start circuit, which isn't working obviously. And this other line, this other white wire coming from the starter switch, goes all the way down here, following here. And this is one of the contacts in the engine compartment on the left-hand side, and this will go to the starter motor. M means motor. So what my hypothesis is that those two white wires that are sort of dangling there are actually these two. And that's why the cold start circuit is just not activated at all. Since the car does crank, it means that there's another wire that has been sort of substituted here that goes to the starter motor. So the way I'm going to test that is I'm going to see if one of them is this wire. And the way I do that is I'm going to be test continuity between this terminal and the end of the wire underneath the dashboard. And you do that with the multimeter. You set the thing on continuity, which is down here. And what this means is that there will be a buzzer that will sound if your two leads are in electrical contact. So let's say it's the same wire, which would be represented by this one here. One contact would go to that side. The other, doing this one-handed, will go into this side, and it should, and you hear the voltmeter. It should be a little louder than that, but it's buzzing. That tells me that there's continuity, which of course it means because it's the same wire. So if that is the same wire, I should get a buzz on my voltmeter once I set it up. Okay, here's my test setup. I've got there's the my alligator clip on those. So it's coming up here, wire through the door, up and around, up and around. Clip, and then to my voltmeter there, and then the red wire, the red probe is going all the way back here into the fuse box, and that will go in the Y3, which is this one here. It's a third wire in. I'll have to press it in like that. And that tells me that's the very wire. So what I've shown is that we know why the cold start system on my car doesn't work. That's clear. That plug has been removed from, or those wires have been removed from the connector to the starter switch. All right. So before I work under the dash, I want to remove the seat. There's some room to work with underneath. Alrighty, so here's the situation. Here are the white wires that are just dangling there, right? Here is my connection. This one goes to the starter switch, and this one connects the starter switch to various functions in the car, including the starter motor. Now, as before, let's see if you can see here, my hypothesis is that these two wires here, the dangling white wires, are these two. So these two, and they feed into the number 50 terminal on the starter. And these wires are all supposed to be white. And so these would be the two wires there that are dangling free. And the wire from the starter, I'm assuming, is the white one in there. See, there's a white wire behind these blue ones. It's kind of buried. And that one would be, if you look at the connectors here, there are eight sort of pins. I'm sorry, there's 7 pins. There's the possibility of 8 in this sort of connector. And the terminal 50, I think, which connects to the white wire, would be the middle one of the 3. So it'd be that one where my finger's pointing. And that one corresponds on this connector. So the female connector there. And it's hard to see, you can't really see it, but I believe it is the green wire that you see there. Or in my diagram, as I've tried to, hopefully that will show it a little bit. The upper one of these sort of grids is the one to the starter switch, and the B one marked B is actually Bianco. That's a white wire, right? And then if you look at the female plug that goes to the rest of the car, I think originally where I have V there, which is the corresponding position, right? So here's B, the white wire, and then the green wire, which is the V wire. This was originally the two white wires would plug into that connection. So my hypothesis is that the V wires is going to the starter motor. And so what I want to do is first check that. I'm going to pluck the green wire out, and then I'm going to reconnect the connector. And what should happen is, if I'm correct, if I turn the starter, all my lights and accessories should come on. But when I turn to crank it, I should get nothing. And then I'll do a voltage check there if I can get a probe in there. Okay, the way you remove these connectors in here, they're very tricky. Is if you see in this small rectangular part, this is the female plug here, you stick a very small screwdriver underneath, and you bend, there's a tab underneath that you bend back right there, which is kind of a barb. It goes in, and then when it snaps over, it will be held in place, and so the wire doesn't pull out. And so you just pull this in. If you haven't mangled it and pulled out the wire, you can just pull the wire out gently, and it'll be removed. Here I'll use some tweezers, and hopefully this will remove my. There's my connector. Okay. So what we want to do now is, if we want to test before we do anything else, is to test to see whether this green wire actually is the wire that I think it is going to the starter motor. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to replug this in. Everything's connected in there except that green wire. And what it should do, when I start the car, all my accessories should come on. But when I crank it, when I turn it in position 3, the start position, the starter motor shouldn't engage. Just to make sure, we put ourselves in neutral. So we go like this, all my lights come on, and then I turn the key, and that's exactly what I want. Turn the key, nothing. Okay, I'm going to test the voltage with a test light. And I just want to make sure that my voltmeter, the probe wasn't sort of long enough to go into here to get a contact. So what I'm going to do is, when I go to position 2, there shouldn't be any light at all. But when I crank, it should light up if I'm in contact with the plug. There it is. See, the light goes on. So that's what I want to see. Okay, so what we want to do again is we want to reconnect this white wire, and I'm going to use this connection because it's nicely soldered on there,
And so what I'd like to do is to simply, let me see how, there are these white wires, is to determine, first of all, which one of these is actually the cable to the starter motor. From the continuity test that I performed, I just simply established that there's continuity between, where's my finger, between this plug and the Y3 terminal in the fuse box. I'm pretty sure the green cable is fairly thick. It draws a much more current than the cold start circuit. And as you see here, these two wires have different gauges. So I'm 99% sure that the wire that I want to cut would be the bigger one, and that I'd connect to the green wire. So I'll cut that, and just to make sure, I'll run a continuity test here with the Y3 terminal and the fuse box, and I should get continuity there. If I don't, that would mean that I cut the wrong wire, and then I'd have to resolder and do some stuff. So I'll do that just to be safe, but I'm pretty sure it's the thicker wire. Okay, you see I cut this wire here, and so now I'm going to do my continuity test, setting up my sort of rig of, go into my plug there, and this one plug will go outside the car. Continuity, white wire to the Y3, and there you have continuity. So I guessed right, as I thought. First thing before I forget, I'm going to put the heat shrinking. I'll put that one up, the wire. And so it stays there and doesn't slide into my workspace. I'll put a little bit of tape there as we're working against gravity. And then what we're doing is here we're attaching these two wires. And so first I'm going to sort of braid them together by splaying the wires out first, like so, and I'll do that on this side. And then I'll just braid them together. Ideally, you twist these really, really well. So we go like that. So what I'm going to do is just put some solder, and then I'll put some heat shrink around it, and that should do it. Okay, there's my solder joint. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but soldering is not my forte, but maybe there's too much. There we go. There we go. Clicks right in. All right. So now we're going to click this in and see if the car starts. I think that's clicked in. Okay. All right. Okay, here's the test. Make sure the car's in neutral. And I should crank. Ready? Okay, go. Stop. Okay. Okay guys, I'd just like to close out this video by just briefly looking at sort of the history of my car and how this problem that I just fixed was dealt with by the previous owner. And it's interesting, in 2016, not that long ago, he brought it in as part of some other work that he's having done. This is in March of 2016, and he asked them to check the cold start system. The previous owner also lived in Chicago like me, and March is pretty cold, so I'm sure he had some trouble cranking up the Ferrari. But they looked at the system and they determined that there was nothing wrong, which raises the question of what kind of tests were they performing, and then it's difficult to check the cold start circuit, because typically when someone brings in a car into a shop, they had to drive it to get there, and then the car's started up and moved around the shop, and so it's kind of hard for them to actually test it unless they leave it overnight and start the next day. But whatever the case, they said they did a test, said it checked out okay. Obviously it wasn't okay, because we know there was a problem, and from the fact that a couple of months later, in July of the same year, July of 2016, brings it into another shop, and he asked this other shop to check the cold start system. And this time, what they did was they tested the cold start. Well, they replaced among other things, they replaced the cold start injector, citing an erratic spray pattern. I suspect that part didn't have to get replaced. An erratic spray pattern, that sounds like more to me like kind of a rationalization for replacing the part, rather than because I don't see how an erratic spray pattern. It's important for the regular injection system for the performance of the car, but I don't see how that would really account for the cold start. And in any case, they replaced that part, and it didn't solve the problem, because the next month, in August of 16, he brings it back, and this time, let's see where we are here. This time they replaced the Thermotime switch, as I did, citing an erratic reading. Again, that sounds to me like a rationalization for just replacing that particular part, and as we know, that wasn't sort of the issue. So this is all to say that these shops weren't dishonest or anything, but they didn't do sort of a thorough checking, and I think they just sort of tended to throw parts at the problem, and they charged the customer for those parts, hoping that that might sort of solve it, but it didn't solve it. And what they should have done is done some of those extensive tests that I did. Now, I made the same mistake. I also replaced the Thermotime switch. Of course, I'm learning as I go, and presumably a good sort of professional mechanic would, I think, before sourcing some of those parts, is do a more thorough test, because those tests are very easy to perform. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful for you all. Thanks for watching.